The moonlight cast long shadows across the dusty Texas plains as Tabitha Sterling ran through the tall grass, her breath coming in desperate gasps. The year was 1872, and for the first time in her 22 years of life, she tasted freedom bitter, terrifying freedom that filled her lungs with each painful breath. Behind her, the plantation house blazed against the night sky, orange flames licking at the heavens, but she didn't dare look back. Her calico dress was torn at the hem, her boots muddied, and her dark hair had come loose from its pins, streaming behind her like a banner of defiance. Tabitha had nothing but the clothes on her back and the small leather pouch containing her mother's silver locket. What she didn't have were her papers, the documents that legally bound her as an indentured servant to Jeremiah Caldwell, a man whose cruelty knew no bounds. Even after the Civil War had ended and slaves had been freed, Caldwell had maintained his grip on Tabitha through these papers, claiming she owed a debt that seemed to grow rather than diminish with each passing year. The sound of hoofbeats in the distance made her heart nearly stop. They were coming for her. Caldwell's men never gave up a chase, especially when their master's property was at stake. Tabitha veered toward a cluster of trees, hoping the darkness would swallow her whole. The creek bed appeared suddenly, causing her to stumble and fall. Cold water soaked through her dress as she scrambled to her feet, but the damage was done. Her ankle throbbed with pain. She limped forward, knowing she couldn't outrun horses now. "Over here!" a gruff voice called from somewhere to her left. Tabitha bit back a sob and pushed deeper into the trees. The branches scratched at her face, but she pressed on, ignoring the pain. Better to die in these woods than return to Caldwell's house. The hoofbeats grew louder, then suddenly stopped. She heard the splash of water as someone crossed the creek. Tabitha pressed herself against the trunk of a large oak, trying to make herself invisible in its shadow. "Miss?" The voice was different, lower, gentler than the first. "I know you're out there. I'm not with them." Tabitha remained silent, her heart hammering against her ribs. "I've got a horse waiting on the other side of these trees. If you want to get away from Caldwell, now's your chance." She squeezed her eyes shut. It could be a trap. But what choice did she have? "Why would you help me?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. A figure emerged from between the trees, tall and broad-shouldered. In the faint moonlight she could make out a weathered face beneath the brim of a cowboy hat. "Because no person should own another," he said simply. "My name's Beckett Zachary. Most folks call me Beck." Tabitha hesitated, weighing her options. Death or capture seemed certain if she stayed. "They're coming from the east," Beck continued. "We need to move west, toward Cottonwood Creek. I've got friends there who can help." A distant shout decided for her. Tabitha stepped forward, wincing as she put weight on her injured ankle. Beck noticed immediately. Without asking permission, he swept her into his arms. She stiffened, unused to being touched without violence following. "Sorry, madam, but we don't have time for proper introductions," he said, his voice rumbling against her side as he carried her swiftly through the trees. As promised, a horse waited on the other side, a sturdy palomino that nickered softly as they approached. Beck set Tabitha gently on the saddle before swinging up behind her. "Hold tight," he murmured, and then they were galloping across the open prairie, away from Caldwell's men, away from the life Tabitha had known. She hadn't expected freedom to feel so terrifying or to smell like leather and pine, which seemed to emanate from the stranger whose arms encircled her to hold the reins. They rode hard for hours, only stopping briefly to rest the horse. Dawn was breaking on the horizon when Beck finally guided the palomino down into a shallow ravine where a small cabin nestled against the rock face, nearly invisible from the trail above. "My line shack," he explained as he helped her dismount. "Not much, but it's safe." Tabitha swayed on her feet, exhaustion and pain making the world spin around her. Beck steadied her with a hand on her elbow. "Let's get you inside. You need rest." The cabin was indeed small, just one room with a stone fireplace, a narrow bed against one wall, a rough wooden table with two chairs, and a few shelves holding supplies. Beck quickly got a fire going while Tabitha stood awkwardly by the door. "Sit before you fall down," he said, gesturing to one of the chairs. "I'll make some coffee." Tabitha sank onto the chair, watching him warily. Men in her experience wanted something in return for their help. She wondered what this cowboy would demand. Beck seemed to read her thoughts. "You're safe here, Miss Tabitha," she said after a moment's hesitation. "Tabitha Sterling." "Miss Sterling, I won't ask what you did to make Caldwell send his men after you in the middle of the night, but I've heard enough about him to know he doesn't deserve loyalty." "I didn't do anything," Tabitha said, sudden anger giving strength to her voice. "I've worked off my contract 3 times over, but he keeps changing the terms. She broke off, realizing she'd said too much. Beck handed her a tin mug of strong coffee. "Contracts like that are just another form of slavery. They should have died with the war." "He has my papers," she said quietly. "He says without them I have no rights, no proof of who I am. I'll be arrested as a vagrant, or worse." Beck's jaw tightened. "Those papers don't define you, Miss Sterling." "Maybe not, but the law says different." They fell silent as dawn fully broke outside the cabin window. Tabitha's eyelids grew heavy, the coffee unable to combat her exhaustion. "Take the bed," Beck said, standing and stretching. "I need to check on the horse and make sure we weren't followed." Tabitha wanted to protest, to maintain her vigilance, but her body betrayed her. She barely made it to the narrow bed before sleep claimed her. When she awoke, the sun was high in the sky. For a moment she panicked, not recognizing her surroundings. Then the events of the previous night flooded back, and she sat up quickly. Beck sat at the table cleaning a revolver. He looked up when she stirred. "Good afternoon," he said. "Thought you might sleep straight through to tomorrow." Tabitha pushed her tangled hair from her face, suddenly conscious of her bedraggled appearance. "How long was I asleep?" "About 8 hours. You needed it." He set the gun aside. "Are you hungry?" Her stomach answered with an embarrassing rumble, and Beck smiled, the first real smile she'd seen from him. It transformed his face, softening the hard lines and making him look younger than she'd initially thought. Perhaps 30, not 40. "I've got beans warming on the fire and some biscuits from yesterday," he said, standing to fetch a plate. Tabitha swung her legs over the edge of the bed, testing her ankle. It was swollen but bearable. "Thank you," she said as he handed her a plate of food. "For all of this. But I don't understand why you're helping me." Beck settled back into his chair. "Let's just say I've got no love for men who think they can own people. You don't even know me. I know enough." He took a sip from his own mug. "I know Caldwell's reputation. I know those so-called indentured contracts are just paper chains. And I know a person running for their life when I see one." Tabitha ate slowly, considering his words. "What happens now?" "That depends on you. Caldwell won't give up easily. His kind never do. But we've got some options." "We?" Beck leaned forward, his blue eyes serious. "I'm not in the habit of rescuing folks just to abandon them halfway. Unless you want me to leave you be?" Tabitha shook her head quickly. "No, I have nowhere to go." "I thought as much." He stood and walked to a small trunk in the corner of the cabin. From it, he withdrew a folded map and brought it back to the table. "Cottonwood Creek is 2 days' ride from here. I've got friends there. Good people who help folks like you start fresh." "An underground railroad of sorts?" Tabitha asked, surprised. Beck's eyebrows rose slightly. "Something like that. Not as organized, but the same idea. The war might be over, but freedom's still just a word for too many." Tabitha studied the map, tracing the route with her finger. "Caldwell will have telegraphed ahead to every town within 100 miles by now. He'll claim I'm a thief, maybe worse. Which is why we'll avoid towns altogether," Beck said. The less people who see us, the better. You keep saying we, Tabitha noted. Don't you have your own life to get back to? A ranch to run? Family? Something flickered across Beck's face, a shadow of old pain, before he shrugged. My cattle can spare me for a few days, and I've got no family to miss me. There was a story there, but Tabitha didn't press. Everyone had their secrets, their wounds. She certainly had hers. We should leave before dark, Beck continued. Rest today, then ride hard tomorrow. With luck, we'll make it to Cottonwood Creek by the day after tomorrow. Tabitha nodded, fear and hope warring within her. And then? And then you decide what kind of life you want to build. Beck rolled up the map. That's what freedom means, Miss Sterling. Choices. Something about the way he said it so matter-of-factly, as if her freedom was already a certainty and not a dangerous dream, made tears spring to Tabitha's eyes. She blinked them back hurriedly. Just, Tabitha, please, she said. If we're going to be traveling together, there's no need for formality. Beck smiled that transformative smile again. Tabitha, it is. They spent the rest of the day preparing for their journey. Beck showed Tabitha how to load and fire his spare revolver, a small Colt that fit her hand surprisingly well. I hope you won't need it, he said, but hope doesn't keep you alive on the frontier. As sunset painted the sky in brilliant oranges and reds, they packed their meager supplies onto the Palomino, and a second horse, a sturdy bay mare that Beck had apparently hidden nearby the previous night. She's gentle, but sure-footed, he said as he helped Tabitha mount. She'll serve you well. Tabitha stroked the mare's neck, feeling a strange kinship with the animal. Both of them were heading into the unknown, trusting this quiet cowboy to guide them safely. They rode under the cover of darkness, keeping to ravines and tree lines whenever possible. Beck seemed to know the land intimately, navigating without hesitation even when Tabitha could barely make out the terrain ahead. How do you know this area so well? She asked during a brief rest to water the horses. Beck cupped water in his hands from a small stream, drinking deeply before answering. I was a scout during the war. Learned to read land the way most folks read books. Out here, knowing the land can be the difference between life and death. Which side? Tabitha asked before she could stop herself. Beck wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. Union. Though out here, that distinction didn't always mean much. The war was different on the frontier. They remounted and continued their journey in companionable silence. Tabitha found herself studying Beck's profile against the starlit sky, the strong jaw, the straight nose, the way his eyes seemed constantly alert to their surroundings. He was handsome in a weathered way, like the land itself. Dawn found them deep in unfamiliar territory, at least unfamiliar to Tabitha. The flat plains had given way to rolling hills dotted with oak and mesquite. In the distance, a line of darker trees suggested a river or creek. We'll rest there during the day, Beck said, pointing to the trees. Too dangerous to travel in daylight with Caldwell's men likely combing the area. The creek was shallow but cool, shaded by cottonwoods that rustled gently in the morning breeze. Beck helped Tabitha dismount, his hands strong and steady at her waist. She tried to ignore the warmth that spread through her at his touch. They made a simple camp, well concealed within a cluster of trees. Beck pulled jerky and hardtack from his saddlebags, offering them to Tabitha along with his canteen. Not exactly fine dining, he said apologetically. Tabitha smiled. After Caldwell's kitchen, this is a feast of freedom. Beck's expression darkened. Were you a house servant then? Cook's helper, Tabitha replied, looking down at her calloused hands. Though Caldwell expected other services as well. The silence that followed was heavy with understanding. When Tabitha finally looked up, Beck's eyes held a controlled fury that both frightened and comforted her. If I ever meet Jeremiah Caldwell, he said quietly, one of us won't walk away. He's not worth your life, Tabitha said quickly. Maybe not, but you are. The simple declaration hung in the air between them. Tabitha felt her cheeks warm and turned away, pretending to adjust her bedroll. You should get some sleep, Beck said after a moment. I'll keep watch. Wake me in a few hours, she insisted. You need rest too. Beck nodded, though Tabitha suspected he had no intention of waking her. She lay down, using her saddle as a pillow, and closed her eyes. Despite her intention to stay alert, the gentle sounds of the creek and the knowledge that Beck was standing guard soon lulled her to sleep. She dreamed of running through endless fields, papers with her name on them fluttering just beyond her reach. Each time she grabbed for one, it burst into flames. Behind her, Caldwell's laughter echoed like thunder. Tabitha woke with a start to find the sun high overhead. Beck sat nearby, whittling a small piece of wood with his knife. Bad dreams? He asked without looking up. Tabitha sat up, pushing her hair from her face. How did you know? You were talking in your sleep. He set the wood and knife aside. Something about papers burning. I wish they would burn, she said bitterly. Those papers have ruled my life since I was 16. Beck studied her face. How did you come to be indentured to Caldwell? Tabitha hesitated, then decided truth was the least she owed him after all he'd risked for her. My father died in '66, leaving my mother with debts. Caldwell offered to clear them in exchange for my service for 2 years. She laughed humorlessly. 2 years turned into 6, with new expenses added to my account faster than I could work them off. When my mother died last winter, there was nothing keeping me there except those papers. And Caldwell's threats, Beck added quietly. Tabitha nodded. He made it clear what would happen if I tried to leave without his permission, but after what happened 2 nights ago, I couldn't stay any longer. What did happen? Beck asked, his voice gentle. Tabitha stared at the dappled sunlight on the ground. He sold my friend Martha's child. Just took him while she was working in the fields and sold him to a passing trader. The boy was only 4 years old. Her voice broke. When Martha screamed and fought, Caldwell had her whipped. She died from her wounds yesterday morning. Beck's face hardened. So you ran. I set fire to the kitchen first, Tabitha admitted. Not to hurt anyone, just as a distraction. I didn't expect it to spread so quickly. Good, Beck said, surprising her. Some things need to burn before new growth can come. They ate a small meal as the afternoon waned. Beck checked and rechecked their supplies, seemingly restless. Something wrong? Tabitha asked. He scanned the horizon. Just a feeling. We should move on earlier than I planned. Be ready to ride in an hour. Tabitha didn't question him. She'd already learned to trust his instincts. They packed quickly and mounted their horses as the sun began its descent. They had ridden less than an hour when Beck suddenly raised his hand, signaling Tabitha to stop. He cocked his head, listening intently. Riders coming, he whispered. At least 4, maybe more. Tabitha's heart pounded. Caldwell's men? Most likely. Quick. This way. He led them off the trail and into a dense thicket of mesquite and scrub oak. They dismounted and Beck tied the horses, then motioned for Tabitha to follow him to a small rise where they could observe the trail. They lay flat on their stomachs in the grass, waiting. The riders appeared minutes later, 6 men, heavily armed, with Caldwell himself at their head. Tabitha's breath caught in her throat at the sight of him. Even from a distance, his imposing figure sent chills down her spine. They're following our trail, Beck murmured. We need to throw them off somehow. Caldwell raised his hand, bringing the party to a halt directly below their hiding place. She came this way, he said, his voice carrying clearly in the still air. The cowboy too. Find them. The men spread out, examining the ground. One of them pointed toward the thicket where Beck and Tabitha hid. Fresh tracks heading that way, boss. Caldwell nodded. Johnson, Parker, check that brush. The rest of you, keep moving along the trail. They can't have gone far with just 2 horses. 2 men dismounted and started toward the thicket. Beck slowly drew his revolver, his eyes never leaving the approaching men. Stay here, he whispered to Tabitha. If something happens to me, take my horse and ride north until you reach the Red River. Cross over into Indian Territory. Ask for Thomas Blackfeather at the trading post in Broken Bow. I'm not leaving you, Tabitha hissed back. Beck gave her a stern look. This isn't a debate, Tabitha. Your freedom is what matters. Before she could argue further, one of Caldwell's men called out, I found something. They both froze. But the man was holding up a scrap of fabric caught on a mesquite thorn, a piece from Tabitha's dress that had torn off earlier. It's fresh, the man called to Caldwell. They can't be more than an hour ahead of us. Caldwell smiled, a cold expression that Tabitha knew all too well. Mount up. We'll catch them before nightfall. To Tabitha's relief, all 6 riders continued along the trail, following what they believed was Beck and Tabitha's path forward rather than checking the thicket more thoroughly. Once the sound of hoofbeats faded, Beck exhaled slowly. That was too close. What now? Tabitha asked, her voice trembling slightly. We go south instead of west. Double back and throw them off completely. Beck's eyes were hard as he watched the dust from Caldwell's party settle on the horizon. It'll add a day to our journey, but it's better than running straight into them. They returned to their horses and rode south, keeping to rocky ground where possible to minimize their tracks. As darkness fell, Beck pushed them harder, seemingly determined to put as much distance as possible between them and Caldwell. They rode through the night, stopping only briefly to rest the horses. Dawn found them in different country entirely, a landscape of steep ravines and rocky outcroppings unlike the rolling plains they'd left behind. Where are we? Tabitha asked as they finally stopped to make camp in the shelter of a sandstone overhang. The edge of the caprock, Beck replied, helping her dismount. Her legs nearly gave way beneath her, stiff from hours in the saddle. He caught her easily, his strong hands steadying her. For a moment, they stood close, too close, before Beck stepped back. Sorry, he mumbled. You must be exhausted. Tabitha wasn't sure if he was apologizing for the grueling ride or for the moment of contact, but she found herself missing his nearness either way. I'm fine, she lied, trying to hide her wince as she stretched her sore muscles. Beck gave her a knowing look but didn't contradict her. We'll rest here today. The horses need it as badly as we do. Tomorrow we'll head northwest toward Cottonwood Creek. Will we still find your friends there? After changing our route? Beck nodded as he unsaddled the horses. They'll be there, and they'll help us figure out what comes next for you. For us, Tabitha corrected softly. You're as much a fugitive as I am now. Beck paused, looking at her with an unreadable expression. I suppose I am at that. They made a cold camp, not risking a fire that might be spotted. Beck shared the last of his jerky and some dried apples. As they ate, Tabitha studied him openly. Why did you really help me, Beck? She asked. The truth this time. He was silent for so long that Tabitha thought he might not answer. Finally, he set down his canteen and met her gaze. I had a sister, he said quietly. Younger than me by 6 years. After our parents died, I went off to fight in the war, leaving her with an uncle. When I came back, he trailed off, his eyes distant. The uncle had fallen on hard times, sold her contract to pay his debts. By the time I tracked her down, she was dead. Worked to death in a textile mill in Georgia. Tabitha reached out impulsively, covering his hand with hers. I'm so sorry. Beck turned his hand over, briefly squeezing her fingers before pulling away. Her name was Tabitha, too. The coincidence hung between them, heavy with implication. Tabitha felt a tightness in her chest that had nothing to do with fear or exhaustion. I'm not her, she said gently. I know. Beck's eyes met hers. But when I heard Caldwell's men talking about a runaway woman named Tabitha, I couldn't. I couldn't do nothing. Not again. Tabitha nodded, understanding now. You're trying to save her through me. Maybe at first, Beck admitted. But now. He looked away. You should get some rest. I'll keep watch. Tabitha wanted to press him, to ask what he meant by, but now. Yet something in his posture warned her off. She settled onto her bedroll instead, watching as he moved to sit at the edge of their small camp, his rifle across his knees. Despite her exhaustion, sleep eluded her. Her mind kept returning to Beck's story, to the pain she'd glimpsed beneath his stoic exterior. There was more to this cowboy than she'd first thought, depths of feeling behind those watchful blue eyes. When she finally drifted off, her dreams were not of running or burning papers, but of a different life entirely, one where she wasn't property to be claimed, where she could choose her own path, her own heart's desire. She awoke to Beck gently shaking her shoulder. The light had changed, suggesting it was late afternoon. We need to move, he said, his expression tense. I spotted dust on the horizon, riders coming this way. Tabitha scrambled to her feet, helping Beck quickly pack their meager camp. Within minutes, they were mounted and moving, following a narrow game trail deeper into the rugged terrain. Do you think it's them? She asked as they picked their way carefully down a steep incline. Can't be sure, but we can't take chances. Beck led them into a narrow canyon, the walls rising steeply on either side. This leads to a box canyon with a spring. We can hole up there if needed. The canyon twisted and turned, sometimes so narrow they had to ride single file. Tabitha's mare seemed nervous, ears flicking back and forth, hooves occasionally slipping on loose stones. Easy, girl, Tabitha murmured, patting the horse's neck. Easy now. They rounded a bend and Beck suddenly reined in hard. Tabitha nearly rode into him before pulling up sharply. What? She began, then fell silent as she saw what had stopped him. Ahead, the canyon widened into a small clearing, and waiting there were 3 riders, guns drawn. That's far enough, called one of them, a heavy-set man with a bushy beard. Toss your weapons and dismount. Beck didn't move. His hand hovered near his holster as he assessed their situation. We don't want trouble, he said evenly. Just passing through. You're the ones Caldwell's looking for, said another rider, younger than the first. There's a reward, $50 for the woman, dead or alive, and $100 for you, cowboy. Tabitha felt sick. Dead or alive. Caldwell didn't even care if she was returned breathing. Think carefully, Beck said, his voice dangerously calm. 3 against 2 aren't odds I'd normally worry about. The third rider, who had remained silent until now, laughed sharply. It's 6 against 2, mister. The rest of our boys are right behind you. As if on cue, Tabitha heard hoofbeats echoing from the canyon behind them. They were trapped. Beck glanced at her, a silent apology in his eyes, then slowly raised his hands. Seems you've got us at a disadvantage. The bearded man grinned. That's more like it. Now toss that gun, nice and easy. Beck complied, his revolver landing in the dust several feet away. Tabitha followed suit with the small Colt he had given her. Dismount, ordered the bearded man. Hands where we can see them. They slid from their horses, standing close together as the 3 riders approached. From behind them came the sound of more horses entering the clearing. Well, well, said a familiar voice that made Tabitha's blood run cold. Quite the chase you've led us on, Tabitha. Jeremiah Caldwell rode forward, looking immaculate despite days on the trail. His silver hair was neatly combed, his black coat free of dust. Only his eyes betrayed his true nature, cold and merciless as a snake's. Mr. Caldwell, the bearded man said respectfully. Found them just like you said we would. Caldwell nodded, his gaze fixed on Tabitha. You've caused me considerable trouble, girl. The fire destroyed half my property. Good, Tabitha said, lifting her chin defiantly. It was built on suffering. Caldwell's face hardened. Your tongue has grown bold in freedom. We'll remedy that soon enough. His eyes shifted to Beck. And you, the heroic cowboy who thinks he can steal what's mine. She's not yours, Beck said quietly. She's not anyone's but her own. Caldwell laughed, the sound echoing unnaturally in the canyon. I have papers that say different. Legal documents recognizing my ownership of her labor until such time as her debt is paid. He reached into his coat and withdrew a folded packet of documents. These papers are the law, cowboy. The law is wrong, Beck replied simply. Caldwell's smile vanished. Tie them up, he ordered his men. We ride back at first light tomorrow. His cold eyes returned to Tabitha. You'll work off the damage you've caused, Tabitha. Every penny, even if it takes the rest of your life. Two men dismounted and approached with ropes. Tabitha felt despair wash over her like a physical wave. So close to freedom, only to be dragged back into bondage. Wait, Beck said suddenly. I have a proposition for you, Caldwell. The older man raised an eyebrow. I'm listening. How much is her contract worth? Beck asked. Name your price. Caldwell studied Beck with new interest. You want to buy her contract? And what would a saddle tramp like you use for payment? I've got a small spread north of here, about 200 head of cattle. Good stock. I'll sign it all over to you. Tabitha stared at Beck in shock. His ranch? His livelihood? For her? Caldwell seemed equally surprised. That's quite an offer for a woman you barely know. She's worth it, Beck said simply. Something shifted in Caldwell's expression, a calculating look that Tabitha recognized all too well. He was weighing the offer against his desire for vengeance. Your cattle against her contract, Caldwell mused. Tempting. But there's still the matter of the damages to my property. And the principle of the thing. Can't have people thinking they can steal from Jeremiah Caldwell without consequences. The cattle and me, Beck said. I'll work for you for 1 year. No pay. Beck, no, Tabitha whispered urgently. He didn't look at her, his eyes fixed on Caldwell. That's my final offer. Caldwell stroked his chin thoughtfully. Your ranch, your cattle, and a year of your labor. For her freedom. He smiled suddenly, a predatory expression. Done. Relief flooded through Tabitha, quickly replaced by horror as she realized what Beck was sacrificing. Before she could protest further, Caldwell continued. Of course. I'll need those papers signed immediately. Can't risk you changing your mind. Beck nodded. I want to see her contract first. Caldwell passed the packet of documents to Beck, who unfolded them carefully. His eyes scanned the pages, his expression hardening. This isn't a contract, he said. It's slavery dressed in legal language. It's binding all the same, Caldwell replied. Now, about your ranch. Beck looked up from the papers, his eyes meeting Tabitha's. Something passed between them, a moment of perfect understanding that took her breath away. You know, Beck said conversationally, turning back to Caldwell. I've never much believed in paper promises. In one fluid motion, Beck tossed the documents into the small campfire that Caldwell's men had started nearby. The papers caught immediately, curling and blackening in the flames. What are you doing? Caldwell shouted, lunging forward. Beck moved faster. His hand found his boot knife, the weapon Caldwell's men had overlooked, and in an instant, he had it pressed against Caldwell's throat. Nobody move, he commanded as Caldwell's men reached for their guns. You're a dead man, Caldwell snarled, though he remained very still with the knife at his neck. Maybe, Beck agreed, but you'll go first. His eyes found Tabitha. Get the horses. She moved quickly, gathering the reins of their mounts while keeping a wary eye on Caldwell's frozen men. Those papers were the only proof of her indenture, Beck told Caldwell, his voice steady despite the tension thrumming through the clearing. Without them, She's as free as any woman in Texas. I'll have copies drawn up, Caldwell hissed. This changes nothing. It changes everything, Beck countered. He looked directly into Caldwell's eyes. You can chase us, hunt us, spend the rest of your miserable life trying to get her back. Or you can acknowledge what we both know: she's paid her debt 100 times over. She burned my house. And you killed her friend, Beck replied coldly. I'd say that makes you even. Tabitha brought the horses closer, her heart pounding so loudly she was sure everyone could hear it. Mount up, Beck told her, never taking his eyes off Caldwell. Easy now. She climbed into the saddle, watching anxiously as Beck began to back toward his own horse, knife still held at Caldwell's throat. One of Caldwell's men shifted, his hand inching toward his holster. I wouldn't, Beck warned. Your boss will be dead before your gun clears leather. The man froze. Beck reached his horse and swung up into the saddle in one smooth motion, the knife never wavering from Caldwell's throat until the very last second. Then he backed his horse away, putting distance between himself and the furious plantation owner. She belongs only to herself now, Caldwell, Beck called. Remember that before you waste more time chasing her. With that, he wheeled his horse around and galloped toward the mouth of the canyon, Tabitha close behind him. They rode hard, expecting shots or pursuit at any moment. But when they reached a ridge several miles away and looked back, the horizon remained empty. Why aren't they following? Tabitha asked, breathless. Beck's expression was grim. They will. Caldwell's just regrouping. We need to keep moving. You burned my papers, Tabitha said, still not quite believing what had happened. They weren't worth the ink used to write them. Beck's face softened as he looked at her. No piece of paper should ever determine a person's worth or freedom. Tabitha felt tears stinging her eyes. You risked everything back there. Not everything, Beck said quietly. Not yet. The way he looked at her sent warmth spreading through Tabitha's chest, a feeling so foreign and unexpected that she didn't know how to respond. She looked away, flustered. We should go, she said finally. Cottonwood Creek is still a day's ride away, isn't it? Beck nodded, though something like disappointment flickered across his face. We'll take a different route now. Caldwell will expect us to continue north. They rode east instead, following game trails and dry creek beds, always staying alert for signs of pursuit. As night fell, they made camp in a shallow cave overlooking a small valley. It's beautiful, Tabitha said, as they watched the sunset paint the landscape in brilliant golds and purples. I never knew the world could look like this. The frontier has a beauty all its own, Beck agreed. Harsh sometimes, but honest. They ate a small meal of the provisions Tabitha had managed to grab from Caldwell's saddlebags during their escape: bread, cheese, and dried fruit. A feast compared to what they'd had before. What will happen when we reach Cottonwood Creek? Tabitha asked as they sat side by side at the mouth of the cave, watching stars appear in the darkening sky. Beck poked at their small fire with a stick. My friends there can give you a place to stay while you decide what you want to do next. Maybe help you find work if that's what you want. And you? Tabitha asked, suddenly anxious. What will you do? He stared into the flames. Keep moving, I expect. Caldwell won't forget what I did. Because of me, Tabitha said softly. I've cost you everything, haven't I? Your ranch? Your home? No, Beck said firmly. Caldwell and men like him cost me those things. Men who think they can own other people's lives. He turned to look at her, his face illuminated by the firelight. Besides, a home is more than just a place. Something shifted between them in that moment, a recognition that neither was quite ready to name. Tabitha looked away first, her cheeks warming. We should get some rest, Beck said after a moment. Tomorrow will be a long day. They slept on opposite sides of the small fire, Yet Tabitha felt more connected to Beck than she had to anyone in years. As she drifted off, she wondered what it might be like to build a new life, one she chose freely, with someone who saw her as a person, not property. Dawn brought cool air and a sense of renewed purpose. They packed quickly and rode out as the sun crested the horizon, casting long shadows across the valley below. The day passed without incident, the miles falling away beneath their horses' hooves. By mid-afternoon, Beck pointed to a distant line of trees. "Cottonwood Creek," he said. "We'll be there before sunset." Relief and apprehension warred within Tabitha. Soon she would be truly safe. But what then? What future could she build from nothing? They were less than an hour from the creek when Beck suddenly reined in, his posture alert. "What is it?" Tabitha asked, immediately tense. Beck pointed to a thin column of smoke rising from the trees ahead. "That's not a campfire." They approached cautiously, Beck leading them on a circuitous route that offered cover. As they drew nearer, the acrid smell of burned wood reached them. "Stay here," Beck told Tabitha when they were still a quarter-mile from the creek. "I'll check it out." "No," Tabitha said firmly. "We stay together." Beck looked like he wanted to argue, but something in her expression stopped him. He nodded. "Stay close then. And if I say run, you run. No questions." They left the horses concealed in a stand of mesquite and continued on foot, moving silently through the underbrush. As they neared the creek, the extent of the damage became clear. The small settlement, little more than a trading post and a few scattered cabins, was in ruins. Buildings smoldered, their blackened timbers stark against the late afternoon sky. "Caldwell," Tabitha whispered, horror washing through her. "He did this." Beck's face was grim as he surveyed the destruction. "Let's make sure no one's hurt." They moved from building to building, finding each one empty. No bodies, thankfully, but no survivors either. "They must have fled," Beck said as they stood in what had once been the trading post. Or Caldwell took them?" Tabitha finished, sick at the thought. Beck knelt to examine something on the floor, a piece of paper, partially burned. He picked it up, his expression darkening as he read. "What is it?" Tabitha asked. Beck handed her the paper. It was a crude, wanted poster with Beck's face roughly sketched on it. The words beneath offered $500 for him, dead or alive, and the same for Tabitha. "He's not going to stop," Tabitha said, her voice hollow. "He'll hunt us forever." Beck stood, his jaw tight. "Not if we stop him first." "How?" "He has men, money, influence, and we have nothing to lose." Beck took her hand, his calloused palm warm against hers. "Tabitha, I can't ask you to keep running with me. It's too dangerous. If you want, I can take you to the nearest town with a railroad. Get you passage east, somewhere Caldwell can't reach you." Tabitha looked down at their joined hands, then up at Beck's face. In his eyes, she saw concern, determination, and something else. Something that made her heart beat faster. "Is that what you want?" she asked quietly. "For me to go east?" Beck's grip tightened slightly. "What I want?" He paused, seeming to struggle with his words. "What I want is for you to be safe and free. Even if that means I never see you again." Tabitha stepped closer to him. "And if I don't want to never see you again?" Something flickered in Beck's eyes, hope, perhaps, or fear. "Tabitha." She silenced him by placing her free hand against his chest, feeling his heart thundering beneath her palm. "You burned my papers and said I belong only to myself. That means I choose my own path now, and I choose to stay with you." For a moment, Beck seemed unable to speak. Then he raised his hand to her cheek, his touch gentle as he brushed a strand of hair from her face. "It won't be easy," he said softly. "We'll have to keep moving, at least until Caldwell gives up or we make him give up," Tabitha finished. Together. Beck's smile transformed his face, erasing years of hardship in an instant. Together, he agreed. The word hung between them, full of promise. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, Beck lowered his head until his lips met hers. The kiss was tentative at first, then deepened as Tabitha slid her arms around his neck. He tasted of dust and pine and possibility a future she had never dared imagine until now. When they finally broke apart, Beck rested his forehead against hers. "I never expected to find you," he murmured. "When I heard about a woman running from Caldwell, I only thought to help a stranger." "And instead?" Tabitha prompted, her heart full. "Instead, I found something I thought was lost forever." Beck's voice was rough with emotion, hope, purpose. He hesitated, then added softly, "Love." Tabitha felt tears spring to her eyes. "I was property yesterday. Today I'm choosing my own heart." Beck kissed her again, briefly but with unmistakable feeling. "We should go," he said when they parted. "It's not safe here." They returned to their horses, both aware that something fundamental had changed between them. As they mounted, Beck pointed west. "There's a place I know in the mountains, remote enough that Caldwell's men won't find us easily, with good water and game. We could winter there, make plans." "Plans for what?" Tabitha asked. Beck's eyes met hers, steady and certain. "For whatever comes next. For the life we choose to build." As they rode away from Cottonwood Creek, Tabitha felt lighter than she had in years, despite the danger still pursuing them. For the first time, she was moving toward something, not just running away. They traveled for 3 days, heading deeper into the mountains where the air grew crisp and pine trees replaced mesquite. On the evening of the 3rd day, they crested a ridge and Beck reined in, gesturing to the valley below. A small cabin nestled against the base of a cliff, a creek flowing nearby. Meadows stretched out before it, golden in the setting sun. "My father built it," Beck explained as they made their way down the slope. "Before he moved us to the ranch. I've kept it maintained over the years. Not many people know it exists." The cabin was sturdy and clean, if simple a main room with a stone fireplace, a small bedroom, and a lean-to kitchen. Tabitha felt immediately at home within its rough-hewn walls. "It's perfect," she said, as Beck lit the lamps, "like a fortress against the world." "It can be our sanctuary for now," Beck agreed. "At least until spring." They settled into a routine over the following days. Beck hunted and taught Tabitha to shoot properly. She cooked and began to plant a small garden, using seeds she found in the cabin's stores. In the evenings, they sat before the fire and shared stories of their lives, the good and the bad, the hopes and the heartaches. 2 weeks after their arrival, Beck returned from hunting with a troubled expression. "What is it?" Tabitha asked, instantly alert. "Riders in the valley to the east," he said, hanging his rifle on the pegs by the door. "Not close enough to be concerning yet, but we should be vigilant." Tabitha nodded, fear coiling in her stomach. "Do you think it's Caldwell?" "Can't be sure." Beck washed his hands in the basin. Could be trappers or prospectors. But they both knew better. Caldwell wouldn't give up so easily. That night, as they lay together in the narrow bed that they now shared, Tabitha voiced the fear that had been growing within her. "We can't keep running forever," she whispered against Beck's chest. His arm tightened around her. "No," he agreed. "We can't." "So what do we do?" Beck was silent for a long moment. "I've been thinking about that," he finally said. "Caldwell's power comes from his reputation and his wealth. If we could damage one or both." Tabitha propped herself up on her elbow to look at his face in the moonlight streaming through the window. "You're talking about fighting back." "I'm talking about ending this," Beck said firmly, "so we can have a life without looking over our shoulders." The idea was both terrifying and exhilarating. "How?" I have friends in Austin, men who fought with me during the war. One's a lawyer now, another works for the governor. Beck's eyes were intent on hers. If we could get proof of Caldwell's practices, proof that he's holding people in virtual slavery despite the law, we could bring him down legally. Proof, Tabitha repeated, like testimony from former servants? That, and any documents he might keep. Records of transactions, debts, punishments? Tabitha's mind raced. He keeps everything in his study, a big leather ledger with all the contracts and accounts. Beck nodded slowly. Then we need that ledger. You're talking about going back, Tabitha said, fear evident in her voice. Back to the plantation. Not you, Beck said firmly. Just me. No. Tabitha sat up fully now. I won't let you risk your life alone. Not for me. Not again. Tabitha. I know that house, she interrupted. I know every corner, every secret passage the slaves used. You'd never find the study without me, let alone get in and out safely. Beck sat up too, running a hand through his hair in frustration. If Caldwell catches you, he'll kill you. If Caldwell catches either of us, we're dead, she countered. But together, we have a chance. They argued long into the night, but in the end, logic won out. Tabitha knew the plantation intimately. With her knowledge and Beck's skills, they might just succeed where either would fail alone. The plan they developed over the next few days was daring but simple. They would travel back to Texas under assumed names, posing as a married couple looking to buy land in the area. This would give them legitimate reason to be seen in town without raising suspicion. Then, under cover of night, they would infiltrate Caldwell's plantation, find the ledger, and escape before dawn. Once we have the ledger, we ride straight for Austin, Beck explained as they pored over maps spread on the cabin table. My friend James can help us present the evidence to the proper authorities. Tabitha traced the route with her finger. It's a long journey, but worth it if it means we can stop running. Beck looked up at her. Are you sure about this? It's not too late to change your mind. Tabitha leaned across the table and kissed him softly. I've never been more sure of anything in my life. They spent another week preparing, gathering supplies, planning alternate routes, discussing every possible contingency. On their last night in the cabin, they sat on the porch watching the stars, a sense of purpose binding them together. Whatever happens, Beck said, his arm around her shoulders, know that these weeks with you have been the happiest of my life. Tabitha leaned into him, savoring his warmth. We'll have many more, she promised. A lifetime of them. They set out at dawn, heading southeast toward the Texas border. The journey was long and often difficult, but they traveled as Mr. and Mrs. Bennett, a fiction that felt increasingly like a future they both wanted. 3 weeks later, they arrived in the small town near Caldwell's plantation. The place was much as Tabitha remembered it, a dusty main street lined with false-fronted buildings, dominated by Caldwell's mercantile store, where many of his indentured servants were forced to buy supplies at inflated prices. They took rooms at the hotel, establishing their cover story with the curious locals. By day, they inquired about properties for sale, gathering information about Caldwell's current situation in the process. The fire damaged the main house, but he's rebuilding, reported Beck after talking with the blacksmith. And he's brought in new workers, all indentured, from what I gather. Has he mentioned us? Tabitha asked anxiously. Not by name, but there are wanted posters at the sheriff's office. They're not very good likenesses, thankfully. On their third night in town, they enacted their plan. Dressed in dark clothing, they rode out to the plantation under cover of darkness. They left their horses concealed in a grove of trees half a mile from the main house and proceeded on foot. Tabitha led them through the servants' quarters, past the rebuilt kitchen, and to a small door at the rear of the main house that was used by house servants. Her heart pounded so loudly she was certain someone would hear it, but the house remained quiet. His study is this way, she whispered, guiding Beck through the darkened corridors. They moved silently, freezing at every creak of the old house. Once they had to duck into an alcove as a guard passed by on his rounds, but otherwise they encountered no one. The study door was locked, but Beck made quick work of it with tools he'd brought for the purpose. Inside, the room smelled of tobacco and leather scents that immediately transported Tabitha back to moments of fear and humiliation in this very room. Beck squeezed her hand reassuringly before moving to the large desk that dominated the space. "Where would he keep the ledger?" he whispered. Tabitha pointed to a cabinet behind the desk. "Bottom drawer. It's usually locked." Again, Beck's tools proved their worth. The drawer slid open silently, revealing several leather-bound books. Tabitha identified the main ledger, a thick volume with the year stamped on its spine. "This is it," she said, lifting it carefully. "And these others, their previous years. Decades of exploitation, all documented." Beck nodded grimly. "Take them all. The more evidence, the better." They packed the books into the satchel they'd brought, working quickly but methodically. Just as they were finishing, footsteps sounded in the hallway outside. "Someone's coming," Beck hissed, drawing his revolver. Tabitha looked around frantically, then pointed to a heavy curtain that covered a window alcove. They slipped behind it just as the study door opened. Through a small gap in the fabric, Tabitha could see Jeremiah Caldwell himself enter the room, followed by another man she didn't recognize. Both were dressed in night clothes, suggesting they'd been awakened for some purpose. "You're certain?" Caldwell was saying as he lit a lamp on the desk. "Yes, sir," the other man replied. "One of the boys spotted them riding toward the plantation earlier. Said the woman matched the description of your runaway." Caldwell's face hardened. "Search the grounds. Every building, every field. They can't have gotten far." "What about the house, sir?" "I'll alert the inside guards. Go now." The man hurried out, leaving Caldwell alone in the study. He moved to the cabinet where the ledgers had been kept and opened the drawer. His expression changed from determination to fury as he discovered the theft. "No!" he snarled, slamming the drawer shut. He strode to the door and bellowed for the house guards. Behind the curtain, Beck and Tabitha exchanged alarmed glances. Their escape route would soon be swarming with men. "We need another way out," Beck whispered urgently. Tabitha's mind raced. "The window," she whispered back. "It's a drop to the garden, but we can make it." Beck nodded and carefully eased the window open while Caldwell was still shouting in the hallway. Cool night air rushed in as the aperture widened. "You first," Beck told Tabitha, helping her onto the sill. She hesitated, looking back at him with sudden fear. "Together," she insisted. Before Beck could argue, the curtain was ripped aside, revealing Caldwell with a revolver pointed directly at them. "Well, well," he said coldly, "the runaways return." Beck moved faster than Tabitha had ever seen, shoving her through the window even as he lunged at Caldwell. The two men collided as Tabitha fell, landing hard in a flower bed below. A shot rang out from above. "Beck!" she screamed, terror clawing at her throat. For an agonizing moment, there was silence. Then Beck appeared at the window, blood streaming from a cut on his forehead but otherwise unharmed. "Run!" he shouted, tossing the satchel of ledgers down to her before climbing through the window himself. Caldwell appeared behind him, struggling to aim his revolver with one hand while holding his bleeding nose with the other. Another shot cracked through the night, going wide as Beck dropped to the ground beside Tabitha. They ran, zigzagging across the garden as shouts and more gunfire erupted from the house. Servants emerged from their quarters, adding to the confusion. In the chaos, Beck and Tabitha slipped through a gap in the garden wall and into the surrounding fields. They ran until their lungs burned, following the creek that would lead them back to their horses. Behind them, lanterns bobbed like fireflies as Caldwell's men organized a search. "We need to split up," Beck gasped as they reached the grove where their horses waited. "I'll lead them west while you take the ledgers east to Austin." "No," Tabitha said fiercely, grabbing his arm. "We stay together, remember?" Beck looked like he wanted to argue, but the determination in her eyes stopped him. "Together," he agreed, helping her mount. They rode hard through the night, pushing their horses to the limit. By dawn, they had put considerable distance between themselves and the plantation, but they knew Caldwell would not give up the chase easily. For 3 days they rode, stopping only when absolutely necessary. On the fourth day, as they approached the outskirts of Austin, they finally allowed themselves to believe they might succeed. "James's office is on Congress Avenue," Beck told Tabitha as they rode into the city, both filthy and exhausted. "He'll know what to do with the ledgers." The lawyer's office was a modest building with a shingle reading "James Harper, Attorney at Law." Inside, a clerk showed them to a private office where a tall, bearded man rose to greet them. "Beckett Zachary," he said with evident surprise. "It's been years." "Too many," Beck agreed, clasping the man's hand. "We need your help, James." Once they had explained their situation and shown him the ledgers, Harper's expression grew increasingly grim. "This is damning evidence," he said, turning pages filled with names, debts, and punishments. "Caldwell has been effectively running a slave operation years after emancipation. But he's a powerful man with powerful friends." "Can anything be done?" Tabitha asked, hope and fear warring within her. Harper studied her for a moment, then nodded slowly. "I have connections in the governor's office, and the federal authorities would be very interested in this case." He closed the ledger decisively. "Yes, something can be done, but it will take time, and you'll need to testify." "We'll do whatever it takes," Beck said, his hand finding Tabitha's. "As long as we're safe from Caldwell in the meantime." "I'll arrange protection," Harper promised, "and lodging where he won't find you." True to his word, Harper set events in motion that would eventually lead to Jeremiah Caldwell's downfall. Federal marshals were dispatched to investigate. Other former servants came forward with their own stories, encouraged by Tabitha's example. 3 months later, Caldwell was arrested on multiple charges of fraud, false imprisonment, and violating federal labor laws. His assets were seized pending trial, and those still working under his contracts were released. On a bright spring morning, Tabitha stood outside the courthouse where Caldwell had just been denied bail, watching as he was led away in chains. "How does it feel?" Beck asked, his arm around her waist. Tabitha leaned into him, considering the question. "Like justice," she said finally. "Not just for me, but for everyone he hurt." Beck nodded, understanding. "What do you want to do now? We can go anywhere, be anyone." Tabitha turned in his arms to face him. "I was thinking about that cabin in the mountains. It felt like home." Beck's face lit with a smile that never failed to make her heart skip. "It could be our home, if that's what you want." "It is," she said. Then, more hesitantly, "But I was thinking, maybe we could make it official first?" Beck looked confused for a moment, then understanding dawned. "Tabitha Sterling," he said solemnly, "are you asking me to marry you?" "I am," she replied, suddenly nervous. "Unless you think it's too soon, or—" He silenced her with a kiss that left no doubt about his answer. When they finally broke apart, both breathless and smiling, he rested his forehead against hers. "I burned your papers and told you that you belong only to yourself," he said softly. "But I'd be honored if you chose to share your life with me." "I already have," Tabitha whispered. "Now I just want to make it permanent." They were married the following week in a small ceremony at James Harper's home. As they exchanged vows, Tabitha marveled at the journey that had brought her here from owned to free, from alone to beloved. Summer found them back in the mountain cabin, which they had begun to expand and improve. Beck built a larger bedroom and started construction on a proper barn. Tabitha planted a garden that flourished in the fertile soil and began to raise chickens. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the valley in gold, Beck handed Tabitha a small package wrapped in brown paper. "What's this?" she asked, surprised. "Open it," he encouraged. Inside was a deed, a legal document declaring that the cabin and surrounding land belonged to both of them equally. "I filed it in both our names," Beck explained, "so there's never any question that this place is as much yours as mine." Tabitha traced her name on the document, emotion welling up inside her. "Thank you," she whispered. Beck took her hand, kissing her palm gently. "No one will ever own you again, Tabitha. Not on paper, not in reality." "I know," she said, leaning into his embrace, "because you burned those papers and gave me the chance to choose my own path. And I chose you." As the sun set over their mountain home, Tabitha reflected on how far she had come from that desperate night when she ran through the tall Texas grass, tasting freedom for the first time. Now freedom wasn't just a taste, but her daily bread, shared with the man who had helped her claim it. And in the years that followed, as their family grew to include 2 children, a boy with Beck's eyes and a girl with Tabitha's determination, she never forgot the night when a cowboy burned her papers and told her she belonged only to herself. It was the beginning of her true life, the moment when she stopped being property and became a person with the right to love and be loved. Their mountain home became known as a haven for others seeking freedom, a place where papers that bound people could be burned and new lives could begin. And though challenges came, as they always do in life, Beck and Tabitha faced them together, secure in the knowledge that they had chosen each other freely and would continue to do so every day for the rest of their lives.